welcome everyone to Project Echo Flourish Connect. I think we all kind of know each other by now. So, as a reminder, this is week 20. We're in our behavioral health and trauma informed interventions section. Moving into week 22 through 24, we'll be looking at health disparities and social determinants of health. Welcome, Ms. Gordon. So, at the end of today's session, we'll just ask that everybody complete the short week 20 survey. And today's speakers have nothing to disclose. So now I will turn it over to Sam Cotton and Barbara Gordon.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing this afternoon?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hope you all have had your afternoon coffee. You've had lunch. You're ready to rock and roll in terms of talking about social isolation and some of the challenges that we have in our nursing facilities for our residents. I hope all of you are staying cool as well. Here in Kentucky, it is sweltering. And I've seen some people shaking their heads like it's warm there too. Wherever you might be, I hope that it's maybe near a fan or some air conditioning. So before we get started with talking about all the ins and outs of social isolation, I wanted to pause and first ask if anybody had any, because we didn't have a case study for this week from you all. Did anybody have any cases or any challenging things that they wanted to talk about before we get started? No? Okay. So I'm going to actually get us started in terms of talking about the strategies on how to combat social isolation. And I thought because we didn't have a case study submitted this week, that I would use one that from a nursing facility that I've worked in the past. And this case study actually comes from our National COVID Action Network Project Echo series that I believe several of you all participated in 2020 and early 2021. So this particular case study focuses on a resident who at that time had lived in the facility around 5 years. She did have dementia, really struggling to manage her activities of daily living without support. That was her primary concern day to day. No real challenging behaviors or anything like that that she was dealing with. However, this did not stop her from engaging with others. She really enjoyed spending time in doing the activities that were available to her, particularly the art therapy or art activities and the group exercises that happened. She also had frequent visits from her family and a lot of outings out to the community. So again, while she did have dementia, she was super involved in the nursing home community and was still able to communicate, really able to engage with the other residents and her friends and family. At the time that we discussed this particular case, there were some at that time, though, we talk a lot about the waves of COVID that we've seen over the last couple of years. At that time, activities were starting to resume back face to face, but she was now really uncomfortable in terms of participating in those. So she tended to keep to herself in her room instead of coming out and participating in those. Staff became really concerned about her because, again, you've got someone who was really engaged and really involved in a number of different activities, and then suddenly no longer able to engage in the same way. So they were very concerned and had observed more declines in her functioning than they'd previously seen. So as we talk today about some of the different interventions related to social isolation, I want you to keep this case in mind because I think what it shows is that for a lot of our residents, even though we might be resuming some face-to-face activities and we think that those are helping with social isolation, there's still that fear associated with COVID. A lot of our residents lost loved ones, they lost friends. They had to experience that collective trauma, and they might not necessarily always know how to express that to us, but we're able to observe it in the fact that a lot of, folks, or significant number of folks, are no longer engaging in the way that they once did, and seem to enjoy the groups like they once did. So when we focus on behavioral, or when we focus on social interventions today, I want you to think about this, because what we've tried to do in creating this content is really focus on some creative and innovative ways to do this, and not necessarily just combating social isolation from the standpoint of it has to be predicated on that face-to-face interaction. So let's just do a quick poll. You can raise your hand, nod your head, put it in the chat. How many of you have residents in your facilities that are dealing with social isolation or loneliness, like Alma, like our case from today? Yeah, I'm seeing some shaking of the hands, rising hand. Yeah, so it's obviously a very real struggle, and especially during this time where, I think we're starting to see a rise in cases as well again. And so at least we are here in Kentucky. And so I think that that's kind of on the mind of everyone as they're trying to develop these different programs that we're doing in our nursing facilities. But for the residents, again, it goes back to that fear piece. So since the pandemic started, we have, I mentioned this earlier, we've had these waves, right? We've had COVID surges, so no face-to-face. That really caused this disjointed challenge for activities directors at our residents. It's really been problematic for the residents and confused about what to do. As COVID cases have dropped, we've maybe resume some of that, but it's creating, sometimes more anxiety related to these different issues, because everything's constantly in flux. And so that becomes problematic or challenging for our residents as they try to navigate what we consider to be this new normal, I guess, so for lack of a better term. I had somebody earlier in the session mention that some of the residents are still coming out of their room when they're not doing activities or have anything planned because of COVID, and just because their default is, oh, we have this activity on this day. So it's been hard to redirect them sometimes back to some of these other activities that they had planned. And so, I think that really highlights that disruption in the day-to-day routine. And let's not forget, so I don't want to just blame COVID for the social isolation that's present within our nursing facilities. I do think prior to COVID, we talked about it a lot more in terms of community dwelling over adults and not necessarily nursing facilities. However, it's just because an individual is living in congregate housing, living, in a community, living like a nursing facility, doesn't mean that they're not lonely. It doesn't mean that they're not dealing with social isolation. And this always has been the case. I do also think that as it relates to this piece, sometimes we talk about loneliness as a person just being completely alone by themselves. But some of our residents could really be lonely and be out doing things because it's not maybe something they enjoy, or they don't feel like they're connecting with the other residents that they're seeing day to day. And so sometimes it really takes that deliberate focus on figuring out what matters most to that resident. So tying it back to some of our other sessions we've had over the course of the last month, and really figuring out, okay, what's next for this individual? How can we keep them engaged in a meaningful way? How can we help them in terms of finding out what it is that they want to do, what they get excited about? And again, this is not a new thing, but something I think we're talking about a lot more. One way that you can really be more deliberate in terms of focusing on loneliness and social isolation is when residents first move into the facility, really spend that time kind of better understanding what they want out of that experience. And then also, what are their likes and dislikes? So a person who you invite to come to the art class that's happening, if they don't feel a connection to that activity, probably gonna stay in the room and not engage in it, right? So sometimes it's figuring out what works best for that person and making sure that you include that in their goals, or the goal setting process or their plan of care, so that it's communicated across staff. And that can be really helpful or instrumental in really bringing this challenge to the forefront when we're talking about resident care. In terms of across the board with social isolation, I have some key statistics or facts here I wanted to share because I think it really highlights why this is such an important conversation. We know based on the research that's been done thus far that social isolation can have a huge impact on physical health. Things like exacerbating some of the issues surrounding chronic health conditions, cognitive challenges like dementia, weakened immune system. Obviously, it has an impact on the person's mental health as well. So things like depression, anxiety, other conditions that would normally we would see might just be exacerbated for that particular individual. Or you might start seeing people who maybe didn't show signs of depression before, but because they're dealing with this loneliness, dealing with the social isolation, that becomes an issue. And then we also see at times for individuals where this becomes such a profound impact on them that there is an increased risk for admission to emergency services as well. Again, it's all of the compounding effects of these different issues that they're dealing with related to the social isolation and loneliness. And Justin, you're making a great point of when I shared this morning about trying to really find that connection for the residents. We had somebody share that they had a resident, a gentleman who had moved into their facility and they had a lot of art activities going on. And he really just liked participating in those. But they figured out he, prior to moving into the facility, had a garden, loved gardening. And so they were able to frame it as, well, we're not really good at gardening and this isn't working. We really could use your help. And so now he's taking over the garden at the nursing facility. So again, it's figuring out what those things are that person really, what matters to them and what they want to focus on that can really decrease that social isolation piece and get them out into the nursing home community. And this is just one of my favorite statistics I always throw out about social isolation, because I think in large part, when we talk about this, it's not this tangible thing that we can understand because it looks different for every person and it's so nuanced and complex. But just to illustrate the impact that it has on you, loneliness and social isolation can be as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So when we talk about this, I think it's really important to conceptualize it that way, because we spend a lot of time focusing our care on, largely on, working with people on individual health behaviors like smoking, exercise, nutrition, things of that nature. And social isolation can have the same impact as or be as damaging as 15 cigarettes a day. So again, just food for thought when you're conceptualizing this, because I do think sometimes this particular challenge gets lost in the shuffle. And then the impact on social isolation on mortality as well. Again, going back to the previous slides I showed, just that connection between the physical health and the mental health, in that this particular study showed that it significantly increases a person's risk of premature death from all causes, and a risk that rivals those of smoking, obesity, and physical activity. So again, thinking about it in these terms, I think makes it a much more serious concern for our older adults. And there are so many interventions that we could try with individuals to help decrease their risk for social isolation and loneliness that we can try out in our nursing facilities. And some of them are very simple. So things that we can do and apply. And then I just wanted to share this too, because again, I wanted to point out that I said earlier that I felt like social isolation and loneliness had always been problems for our nursing facilities, but it got largely ignored just because of, from a national standpoint, maybe we were noticing, those of us working in and out of facilities, individuals with this issue, but collectively it was largely being ignored, and people weren't really talking about it. And maybe we were doing these interventions like at our site, but there wasn't this collaboration to talk about what we can do about this. And during the pandemic, I think we saw a lot more literature and research in this area, discussing, the extended isolation and the impact on mental health, and in turn, the impact on physical health as well. So just wanted to share that piece. And this article is from AARP. And just to go back to some of the other mental health, behavioral health things that we've discussed, and some of the challenges for residents and why we've seen such an uptick in this, is really, we have to think about that disruption of routine. 1 week we might be okay to do face-to-face things. The next week there's no visits. We're wearing the full PPE everywhere, and we're having to cohort individuals within different parts of the nursing facility to be able to provide proper care during a COVID outbreak. So there really was a lot of flux there for individuals. I mentioned this last week about the distancing that sometimes happens with wearing PPE. It can be confusing for residents. And so that distance that they might feel from a person. Somebody in the morning session also mentioned that residents will often ask the person taking care of them to take down their mask real quick so they can see their smiling face, so they know who that person is. And just to have that connection with somebody, because I think that distance that happens, and a lot of our, what is it? They say 60 to 70% of our communication is all nonverbal, right? And so when you're not able to do that with your face, sometimes things get lost in translation, or, people the residents can sometimes get confused. And then you just have that general lack of physical touch that happened. And I think that is one of those things, like even simple touch, like holding someone's hand when they're upset, or patting them on a shoulder, or, things like that can be very difficult for individuals not to have that connection with someone. And Justin saying in the chat that he loved my example of the fish mask that I used this morning. So I'll share that with you all. I was doing some work right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was before we knew we really needed to be wearing surgical masks everywhere, and plus there was a supply and demand issue, as we all know, for a lot of those materials. So I had a cloth mask on that had fish on it. I think it was made out of either a sheet or a pillowcase or something of that sort. Anyway, I was going in and out of a nursing facility, and one of the gentlemen I was working with at the time who had dementia, was very confused as to why there was a fish coming out of my face. So again, just those little things like that, where it's confusing, even the simple things. And then, of course, we also saw that during the pandemic, we had those limited visits from friends and family as well, that individuals really, really struggled with, and not being able to see their loved one was problematic. Before we go on to social isolation interventions, does anybody have any questions about anything so far? Anything you would like to share? Let's take a little pause. I'll take a sip of water. No, okay, we can keep moving on then. So when we talk about social isolation interventions, we really want to be mindful of the ongoing staffing issues. Now, I know a couple of weeks in a row we've talked about this, that a lot of our nursing facilities are feeling very strained because of staff turnover. You have a lot of staff that have turned over because of the pandemic. And obviously we've always had staff turnover in our nursing facilities, particularly in the space of CNAs and direct support workers. But it's gotten worse during the pandemic. So when we talk about these interventions, Barbara and I really wanted them to be things that were simple, that were easy to apply, and that, wouldn't be such a burden on you and the staff who are implementing them. So just things to keep in mind: anything you do, focus on it being simple so that it can be incorporated into the daily workflow. I think that, the simpler the better sometimes, because it's even the small things that we can do related to social isolation that can be so impactful on residents. Whatever it is that's small that can spark that joy for them and really help bring them out of their shell, or getting them to engage or interact. Create fun and engaging activities that are not relying on face-to-face engagement. And I think, where we're at right now with the pandemic and COVID-19, it's not going anywhere, right? We're seeing wave after wave. And so I think it's in our best interest to be more intentional about choosing those activities that aren't relying on that piece, because we never know when we're going to have to go back to not doing things face to face, right? And then in some situations, use of, there's some examples that we're going to talk about that use volunteers remotely, or utilize virtual opportunities for individuals to engage that don't contribute necessarily to a drain on capacity. And so that's just something to keep in mind as well, because I do know that you all are all burdened with just the day-to-day part of providing care. So the first thing I want to cover is our virtual friendly visitor program. And many organizations have similar programs, but I'm going to highlight the one that we do at Traeger. Barbara, are you with us? I don't know if she's with us at the moment. Oh, there she is.
I am. Hi.
I'm going to toss it over to you to see about virtual friendly visitor.
Thank you. Thank you. So many of you may know about friendly visitor programs. That type of service has been around for decades, actually, but it has primarily been a service provided in the community or for community dwelling older adults. During, the height of the pandemic, when we were in shutdown mode, we had a plan to develop and expand friendly visitor services in Kentucky, working and partnering with our area agencies on aging. However, because of the shutdown, we weren't going to be able to do it. So we transitioned to developing a protocol for a virtual friendly visitor program. And one of our organizations that we worked with to implement this program actually implemented in nursing facilities in Eastern Kentucky. And it was very, effective. It was an initiative that was supported by the Area Agency on Aging in the Kentucky River region. And they partnered with a high school who utilized students who were in a club, an association that reaches out or engages students who are interested in health care services. And basically, the way the program works is that we use technology, tablets primarily, for the residents to connect with a volunteer who meets with them on a weekly basis, sometimes more often, sometimes not as frequently, depending on how often that resident wants to engage. The nursing facility staff would facilitate that connection, helping the resident to access the tablet and to connect with the friendly visitor, the student, and just engage in getting to know each other, having conversations, reading, facilitating any type of engagement and activity that resident would like to engage in during that time. And it helped them to develop social connections that they would not have had if not for this particular intervention. Very, very interesting, effective way to build social connections. It's a program that's evolving. We're learning new things all the time. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we are going to make this available to nursing facilities in Kentucky primarily, who might be interested in starting a program like this at your facility. Thank you.
Yay, thank you, Barbara. And I would say that having referred patients that I've worked with to this program, they found it very useful in terms of just bringing them joy, I think, and having somebody to talk to and just chat with, and there's no pressure. It's just a person that you get to talk to. And I hope that when I get older, we have these as well, because I love to talk. So I hope that this is around. So I have somebody to talk to. Another option, similar to virtual friendly visitor programs, but a little bit different, is the Institute on Aging's Friendship Line. And this is a really neat concept because it allows you to refer residents to this friendship line, and then somebody will just talk to them, spend that time. I think pre-pandemic, it might have only been for crisis situations, like maybe you had a resident who was feeling suicidal or needed some just additional support from depression or anxiety. But the way they do it now is they will actually call the individual on a regular basis, check in with them, see how things are going. You can also just call the line as well. If you want to refer an individual to the program, a resident to the program, I actually created a QR code that you can scan that will take you to the website. And when we send out information later today from this session, we'll include the link in the toll-free number as well for you. Family connections. So I think that something I want to share with you is that what ends up sometimes happening with residents is that all the family calls at once, and they don't like stagger it throughout the week. So an individual's getting all this engagement and then nothing. So it's really important, I think, to encourage family to set a routine or schedule calling. I think another thing that was really cute or funny from this morning's session that somebody shared was that they had a resident whose family wanted to FaceTime with them. So they were holding the phone up so that person could FaceTime, and they had I think they said they had dementia. And so they were having issues in terms of understanding that person wasn't in the room, like they were looking in the room for them. It was very confusing and very frustrating for the resident until the staff member thought to just have them put it up to their ear and start talking like it was just a regular telephone call. And then that really eased their anxiety. So sometimes it's figuring out what works for that person. I think it's, interesting because, your first instinct sometimes in these situations where you can't see your loved one as a person not living under, not living with them, you want to maybe do something like a video call or a FaceTime call of some sort so you can see them, they can see you, you can have that more personal connection than just if you were on the telephone. However, sometimes that does pose challenges, right? So making sure that you're helping the family know what's working for them and what's not. The other thing that we often suggest too is during surges, really encourage those window visits instead of if you. The dog has a lot of thoughts about that. He's going to go do a window visit with the UPS person. I would say. Sorry about that, y'all. What I was going to say was really encouraging window visits for family members can be helpful too, because it provides that connection. They can still see their loved one, but they don't have to really physically be in contact and that be such a huge issue. Another option that we've used in the past is simulated presence therapy. This is actually a really cool concept that you can do in different ways based on that particular resident and what they need and what's important to them. So you can have a family member record several questions with pauses for answers. And then you can play that recording for the resident and allow them to answer. And it's what's valuable about this is that it's that familiar voice of the person that they can connect with, that they know, and it can be used over and over again to stimulate engagement. This is also sometimes used in conjunction with reminiscence therapy. So sometimes you might have family members record certain prompts, like, hey mom, tell me about that vacation we took to Myrtle Beach in 1987. And then, obviously pausing so that person can share their responses, share their answer. And sometimes I think, especially with persons with dementia, we need to recognize that they might not always get the facts right. You might not even know the facts as the staff member working with them, right? Or it might not be a logical, coherent conversation that you're having. But I want to just stress that it's important not to focus on like the accuracy of the story they're telling you, but be more focused on that emotion that they display in that moment, especially if they're sharing something that's very impactful from their life. And so making sure that you're really focusing on that particular piece, because it can be very helpful for the person overall. Again, the other value to this is that it's an intervention that's easy to do. You can do it over and over again. I've also seen where people have done videos in the same way. For some persons with dementia, for the same reason we talked about with FaceTiming, that's probably not going to work. Voice is probably going to be better. And can be just a little bit more, even though it's more simple, can be more suited towards what their needs are in that moment. Another great thing that I love, has anybody done this, the hallway games or engagement doing the hallway? Yeah, I've seen a couple of heads nodding here. I think that's a really good one because it's simple. You know, you can still keep everyone engaged in a way. And you're staying 6 feet apart. They're still technically in their rooms as well. You know, some things that I've seen people do: bingo, art activities, sharing stories, name that tune or name that song. And, you know, sometimes choosing a time period for the song piece can be helpful as well. In terms of the art activities, I wanted to say too that I saw one nursing facility, and I can't recall what state this was in, where not only did they do the art activity in the hallway, they also created a kind of art show in the hallway as well. So they would walk everybody else's art around for everybody to see. And so that was kind of a nice way for them to display what they had done. And again, just another way to engage in that way. I also saw one facility that it wasn't really this, it's a little bit similar to the art show, but I did it a little bit differently, where they gave each resident who was participating in this, it was almost like a tile that they decorated. And then they pieced them all together to make a whole piece of wall art for that hallway. So just something to show off some of the, you know, the fruits of the labor of the residents who are engaging in that particular activity. I just wanted to share too, sometimes when you're doing things like the storytelling piece, as it relates to the hallway sharing piece, you know, making sure that you keep it simple for individuals so they can actually share things is important. So here's just some prompts for individuals to share. You might find that some of the residents have a lot more in common than they think they do, because they've never really shared these different activities. The other thing that I wanted to add too is that I saw a nursing facility that created this, it was almost like they were doing a bonfire, kind of sitting around the bonfire and having these kind of sharing activities and storytelling. So they created kind of a fake bonfire in the middle of the hallway that looked cute. And then they made s'mores for everybody and took them around to their room and allowed them to share, just like they were doing, you know, campfire from when they were a kid and sharing stories like from camp. So I thought that was really neat and a cool concept if you're able to do something like that to really just spur that engagement piece, to really spur some of the other conversations that people might be struggling with. And then here are a couple of resources that are easy to use, easy to connect with, where you can engage people in looking at something nice and maybe spur a conversation. But maybe you have residents who are not necessarily interested in doing art. Maybe it's too messy for them, because I commonly hear that in our nursing facilities from some of our residents that I've worked with, that, oh, I don't want to do that, it's too messy. So this might be a way to engage them. MoMA and the Met both have collections of various famous art through different time periods, all posted online with the information about them. And I've seen different activities that they have on there as well, that individuals can do. Sort of if a person does want to do art, some prompts for them, or even just looking at it and engaging in it in that way. So printing off some of the pieces of art, taking them from room to room, kind of like a moving museum for them can be very helpful as well. We actually at U of L did a project several years ago with a local nursing facility here in Louisville, Kentucky. And our art, Fund for the Arts, one of our art community-based programs, had created this traveling, I think they call it a traveling museum or traveling art gallery, where it was almost like a box that popped open. And so it had different pieces of art in it, and they could walk around and show the residents and let them in. It was interactive pieces of art too, so they could kind of interact with it and touch it. So they got not just that talking about it and looking at it, the visual piece and the audio piece, but the tactile touching of something as well, which can be very therapeutic for individuals. And so I've included on here the QR codes for both of these sites, where you can just go and search and find what might be most interesting to your residents. Again, oh, the other thing I want to say, if you want to be more green and not print things out, you could also potentially, if you have a tablet or something on site that you could carry around too, and show individuals, that might be kind of neat for them, because then you could rotate the art that you're showing them on a more regular basis. And then lastly, I think all of the ones that are on these two sites, you can download them as pictures. So if you have any monitors that you have hanging in your facility where you can, that are connected to computers, where you put announcements or something, when you're not using them, you can allow the different things of art to scroll, because sometimes what happens is residents will come to that and kind of watch what's going on, and they will really be focused on kind of engaging with each other as part of that process. And then the other thing art related that I wanted to share is that there have been some models out there of getting residents to engage by replicating paintings. And traditionally in these programs, they've used Picasso paintings because they're easier to replicate. Not to say anything bad about Picasso, but just his style is easy to look at, and residents can do something similar using their own choices for color and things like that. And so things like that can be just helpful in getting people to talk about what they're working on. I would say the other piece to that too is that sometimes while people are not always verbally communicative, they can express themselves in a different way if they're doing it through art. And so what we found is sometimes that that really translates into them opening up and sharing things with their the other residents who they're working or maybe sitting beside doing this, or if you're doing it in the hallway, you know, talking across the hall to each other and things of that sort. So just some suggestions if you're looking for an easy art activity that doesn't take a lot of coordination. You know, doing something like this can be helpful. And then the other thing, and I've done this quite a bit with art therapy type modalities, and this is the thing that really gets people talking, but not always appropriate for, or depending on what you choose to do, might not be appropriate for all persons with dementia. And that's really coming up with some different prompts for what the theme is for the painting for that day. Like I did a recent session with some of our art therapy students at the Traeger Institute, and one of our first sessions we had them actually draw themselves as whatever animal that they thought was their, you know, represented them the most. And so we got some really good stories in talking to them about what their representation meant to them, why that was important to them, and really just allowed them to express themselves. Now, again, the caveat is sometimes if you're working with residents who have dementia, maybe prompts that are a little bit easier for them to conceptualize is going to be better in terms of that particular piece, but really just trying to figure out, you know, what works best for those individuals. Have any of you all tried using art to like get people to not to not just stay in their rooms? Has that been successful for anybody? I'm not seeing any head nods.
I was gonna say, yeah, my facility has been used a lot and seems to be pretty successful.
Any recommendations for different activities that you've seen them doing that you could share?
Related to art or just generally?
Just art. Yeah, I was thinking art, but if you saw something else, that'd be cool too.
They've done because a lot of some of them feel nervous like about their art skills, so I think being clear about that. And I liked the kind of similar to the story that was shared this morning about like I'm a terrible artist, so I was like, oh, I don't know how to do this, can you like show me? And so that's been helpful. Kind of copying sort of landscapes has been helpful. We have a therapy dog that comes on Wednesday and he helps with like the art, and they really like that too. Sorry, you can hear my cat now along with your dog.
Sorry, everybody, I've disrupted anybody who's working from home today's animals.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think, just again, one of the things about the art piece that keep in mind is that, to your point, really setting the tone at the beginning that, it's all about how it makes you feel, not necessarily about what the final product is. And so sometimes, especially those residents who maybe don't have dementia or anything like that, who are aware of their skill set and have insight into that, they might be a little apprehensive or nervous to engage in that particular piece. The other thing, you mentioned therapy pets. Those are awesome for reducing loneliness and social isolation. Sometimes that's not always feasible because of the care involved. Or sometimes there's not programs in your area that offer those services where they come in. So in those situations, they do make these realistic representations of dogs, cats. I think I saw a snake one once. I don't know how I feel about that, but some people might want that if they were into reptiles. But anyway, they are very realistic, can provide a lot of comfort to individuals who are really struggling. Sometimes it's making sometimes they make them so realistic so that if you pet them, they will purr or they might bark or make a noise so that person feels connected. I've seen these used a lot with persons with dementia to provide them that opportunity to have something to feel like they're taken care of, to really even just be able, I think we all of us who have pets probably talk to our pets at some point, right? So have something to talk to and to feel less lonely. So that's a really great option. And in particular is a really good option if you don't have access to therapy animals. Oh, Justin, what are you sharing here? I love seeing animals in facilities, except the one time I was doing an 11th hour visit late at night and a cat jumped in my lap.
I didn't know there was a cat in the facility, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting with a hospice patient, and this cat jumped in my lap, and I almost screamed. I didn't scream, but it's like I had a moment where it was like I didn't know it was happening.
Yeah, that's a thing. That would be very interesting to have happen. The other thing I was going to say too is that I'm thinking out loud now that we should also send you all, there are national pet therapy associations that have regional chapters. So we can send you a link to one of those. So just if you remind me, I'll get that in case you do have the opportunity to have a real live pet come into the facility and do more in that space. Obviously, you always have to be careful of allergies and stuff like that. Fear of animals that some residents might have from past trauma or issues that they've had. So always being aware of those things. But again, another really good alternative is the realistic toys that are representations of different animals. This is a really cool concept that I see popping up quite a bit, and it's really creating that pen pal connection between high school and college students and residents at your facilities. You might have local high school students who are looking for an opportunity to volunteer in some capacity. And so this is a really great opportunity for them to do something that is remote. It provides the individual with something to read and respond to. Even I think I've seen some value in this for persons maybe early stage dementia as well, who can still comprehend to a certain degree what's being sent to them and the purpose and the intent and all of that. So this can be a really great neat program, I think, for individuals. I wanted to ask, has anybody tried using this? No, I'm seeing a bunch of no's here. Just checking if heads of the people I can see. Yeah. I was going to say, in terms of contacting people, a lot of volunteer clubs in high schools always have a sponsor, like some sort of teacher sponsor. So it might be good to do a cursory review of, whatever your local high school is, for example, to see if you have any and knowing English teacher, they might know as well. Yeah, that's a great idea, Justin. I was going to say, if there's any at the local colleges near you, any Bonner programs, they usually that particular program, the students who are part of that are always looking for service hours. In high school, I believe Beta Club is one of the service organizations where they're always looking for these type of outreach programs. And then I would also say too that even just sending cards, even if it's not a back and forth, I've seen where that's been a great model for some places. And even with younger children, if you're having them, like if you know a teacher who's looking for some sort of activity for her class to do, and maybe they're younger, like in kindergarten or first grade, they're learning how to do some things related to writing out their name, them sending that to sending a card with whatever on it to a resident can just really make their day and spark that joy. So this is one of those things when we talk about simple things, this is what, the very simple, if you can make that connection. And everybody likes mail, right? I feel like it's always a fun day when you get mail. So, just something for to make that connection can be helpful. And then our final intervention, I believe that we have, is community parades for nursing facilities. And Barbara, I'm going to toss that over to you.
Great, thank you. I wonder if anyone in our audience this afternoon have experienced a community parade with your nursing facility. This morning, one of the facilities actually had engaged in a number of parades, including one that focused on old cars. So it's pretty interesting. But community parades is really something that it would be good to have community partnership to help facilitate it, taking less, time away from nursing facility staff, et cetera. And basically it is just coordinating. You can coordinate around a special day, a special time, special opportunity, or like the nursing facility this morning who did one of their parades focused on old cars. You can do it from that perspective as well. And you try to engage as many volunteers as possible who are willing to drive their vehicles, whatever that vehicle may be, decorate it, et cetera, and drive it through your facility. We've done it here in Louisville several times through our a partnership with our Age Friendly Louisville initiative. And usually we have maybe 3 or 4 up to 5 nursing facilities that we stop at when we do a parade. And what we ask the nursing facilities to do is to, help bring your residents out so that they can view the parade and engage with the parade participants, whether they're driving or walking. Most of the time, everyone's driving. And it is definitely a really joyful, engaging, happy time, an opportunity for the residents to, have social connections, sometimes with people they know, because you can get their families involved, friends and neighbors, their church communities. You can get them involved as well. So there's a number of ways you can do this particular activity, and it's it's pretty interesting and exciting, and doesn't require a whole lot of time, especially if you have a community partner. Most of the time that will be required of staff at nursing facilities literally is being present the day of the parade and having your residents lined up outside of the facility, or in a place where they can see and experience it. Any questions about how to coordinate a parade for your facility? Any interest in doing that?
I was going to say, Barbara, I loved this morning, and I think you mentioned this as well, that the piece about the old cars driving through, the people, and you mentioned that, I really think that's so neat, especially if you've got any older adult men or even older adult women who really who really were into cars, and that sort of thing. That could be almost a form of reminiscence therapy for them to think about, oh, the car that they had, their first car. So I think that's really, really cool.
We've actually done like 3 different parades. When COVID first started, we had it for the families, and the families, we took all of them out there, and the families drove around, and we made signs and balloons and all that stuff, and the families drove through. And then we also had like a car show, so families brought cars and lined it up around so that we could parade our residents out to actually see all the different cars. And then we were right next to a hospital and another clinic, and they did like a Heroes Appreciation parade. And so the community, ambulances, everybody came through so our residents could see it. So we've tried 3 different times, and they actually really like it. So
yeah, that's awesome.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, Shirley.
Yes, thank you.
I think that's really neat, and I like how you did it different, themes around it too. I think that makes it fun, so it's not just the same thing every time for residents. I saw too, we had I think in this part of Kentucky in Henry County, I remember seeing in the news that they had done a holiday themed one around Christmas time, where they had individuals come out and do a parade and everything. So I thought that was really neat as well. Sometimes you just need cheering up around the holidays, and it's been a rough couple of years, so that was pretty neat too. All right. Does anybody else want to share anything else that you've done, not just parades, but anything that you've done that we haven't talked about today that you would like to share with your colleagues? It seems like everybody needs that extra cup of coffee this afternoon. I totally get that. After I finish my water, I'm going to have some more as well. So I want to thank you all for joining us and talking about social isolation. As promised, we'll get you the links from today, any relevant links that we had, the PowerPoint. Remember, on the PowerPoint, the value of that is those story prompts that you might need if you're doing the storytelling in your in the hallway, or even if you wanted to, outside of the social isolation and loneliness factor of that, use that in reminiscence therapy as well. So we'll get you that information. Next week we're going to be talking about self-care, and specifically focused on all of you who work in nursing facilities, including CNAs and other direct support staff. So we're going to be talking about ways that you can take care of yourself, really creating that space for that in your day-to-day, so that obviously your stress is not going to go away, but this will help you better manage your stress. So if you have any cases that you'd like to share, anything that you would need help with, even if it's not necessarily related to self-care for next week, we're more than happy to help and hear out what's going on. So fill out this case study form. We've got the QR code here, but Justin's also put the link in the chat for easy access. And then it is week 20, so we do ask that you do our week 20 session survey. Again, the QR code is here and Justin's put the link in the chat. Anything else we need to say about the survey?
No, we're good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for completing that. We really appreciate your feedback for this. It really helps us change things up week to week if we need to as well. So we do read that every week. And then if you have questions, please reach out to Justin or Jennifer or both. And
Thanks, everybody.
yeah,
Yeah,
and we have a
great
couple more minutes, so I'll hang back for a few if anybody has anything they need help with.